There, I was just messing around with some cadences. I got this stuff from Ted Greene's website, or the Ted Greene Legacy website. I'm pretty sure that most people watching my videos know who Ted Greene was. This Los Angeles-based guitarist and educator, right? Highly influential and very sophisticated solo guitar playing. So there is this website in his legacy called Ted Greene Legacy, and I recommend that you go there and explore. There's tons of lessons. As from what I understand, it is former students of his that are kind of transcribing and putting together his lessons, because his writing was kind of hard to decipher. So don't forget to donate. There's a donate option there so that they can keep up the good work, as it were. So much stuff you can learn from that website. And this is just one lesson called Cadences from 1973. So before I explain why it's important to do this stuff or what's the point is, let's just get started, and we'll see what we can do with this stuff. So it's going to be my own take on this stuff. I'm not even sure that this is what Ted Greene intended with this lesson, but this is how I work with this stuff. So if you think that sounds interesting, let's get started. So a cadence is just like a chord progression that establishes a key, right? So 1, 4, 5 in the C, for example. So that would be the first cadence here. But it's very specific the way he writes it out, the chord voicings. So you want to be aware of the top note and the bass motion. So I'm not even sure what the exact scientific explanation is for those specific voicings, but I don't need to know that. I just need to know that it works. It sounds like something classical music or a hymn or something. So you want to be aware of the bass, and you want to be aware of the top melody. First, let's explore some bass motion. One thing you can do is go to the next bass note from a diatonic note above. So I'm approaching the next bass note from one step above with the chord. And then play the chord. Here, the challenge is to keep the chord ringing as long as possible. So you might want to change voicing if you, or place on the fretboard. You could also approach the next bass note of the next chord from a half step or a chromatic step below. Here I shifted the, instead of playing the F there, I'm playing it here, because it works better in this case, I think. I could do that. If I change the fingering, I could keep the chord. Here I have a little bit of a problem. I could do that if I'm really sophisticated. The G is no problem to keep the chord ringing when I'm changing bass. The whole point is that you want the bass and the chords to be separate things. The bass line shouldn't kill the chord. And of course, there's many ways you could play the chord right after if we're in a jazz context. or before the beat. Maybe try some arpeggios. So this is just the first out of many examples on this page. Now let's try to make a melody on top of all this. Let's go back to just playing bass as whole notes and try to come up with a melody. Remember, this was the top note. You can find ways to go from note to note. So I'm kind of targeting and then add the chords. You could also target the next top melody note from below using just scalar steps. Again, try to, if it's possible, try to keep the chord ringing or the bass ringing as much as possible. That's kind of the challenge here. It doesn't always have to be a chord tone on the first beat. You could use suspension and resolve it to a chord tone. Let's try that from below. In jazz and more modern music, that tone doesn't have to be resolved. It could be an extension that just stays there, or a seventh or something. That would sound something like this. Now that sounds a little bit weird, partly because of what we just played, so we're kind of still in that the ear wants to resolve that note. But yeah, that wasn't a very good example, so maybe if I just drop the whole thing a step. That works. I'm gonna play a C major 7 instead here. I guess some of you are thinking this is not very, this is sound jazz, it sounds kind of very basic. That's the whole point though. What we're trying to achieve here is the ability to play chords and melody and bass improvised. And in order to be able to do that, you kind of need to start with the basic stuff. With basic, I mean basic Western harmony. That doesn't mean that it's simpler than Wayne Shorter's harmony or Joe Henderson's harmony. In a way, it is more simple, but that doesn't mean that it's less valid or something, because we all know that, you know, classical music is just as interesting as Wayne Shorter music, but it's just a different harmonic content. But by doing this, you can tell that it's already starting to sound a little bit more like jazz. Imagine someone like Keith Jarrett that can go in and play improvised music on the piano, melodies, chords, bass motion, counterpoint, what have you. It's not necessarily jazz, right? If you think of it's the Köln concert or those albums, that's something that's always been kind of, for me, when I started out with jazz, that's what I was interested in, being able to improvise music. And when we play guitar, we talk about improvisation. We often talk about single note lines over some kind of backing jazz group, just like a sax player, or a trumpet or something. But the guitar actually we can't really do what Keith Jarrett is doing, but we can play chords and we can play bass. And if you look at players like Julian Lage, to me it seems like they can go up and just improvise anything. In order to be able to do that, you kind of need to start with a basic harmony. And of course, you should transpose all these things to other keys. Do all that stuff we just did in maybe E. And ultimately, you want to be able to improvise something. If I can use that chord progression and just try to come up with bass motion and melodies. They're adding more kind of bebop-y surround notes and stuff like that. You can also resolve the melody from a half step below. I think it's called appoggiatura. I'm not quite sure what appoggiatura is, but comment below if you know the difference between appoggiatura and just a leading note. But I think it means that you're approaching a chord tone from a chromatic note below, but it should also be a skip, I think. But if I try to do that, sounds like Mozart, right? He always did that. We use Charlie Parker kind of surrounding notes. So if I try some of these other progressions here, it could sound like this. The second one is this. So F with a third in the bass. So then I would do the exact same thing, adding melodies and bass motion to this one. Then there's this one. So all these are on the Ted Greene website, and obviously I will link to that. Try a different key, maybe A. But let's go back to the first one we had in C and make it a little bit more hip sounding. Another thing you can do is change the chord. So if you have a subdominant F, the D minor is also a subdominant, right? The F major and D minor functions the same way in the key of C. They both have a subdominant function. So instead of, I could play D minor, and I could play A minor here. That functions as a tonic. It's a weaker tonic, but it's also a tonic. So that gives me yet another thing I could throw in there when I'm improvising. I could change those chords. So let's make it a little more interesting. Maybe go. Land on that 9. The chord that bothers me is the G. It sounds too much like a traditional hymn or something. So I'm not even gonna play a G7 because it sounds kind of too, I don't know. It's nothing wrong with it, it just doesn't sound like modern jazz. So maybe just change that chord altogether to an A flat major 7, sharp 11. But I'm still deriving this from what we started with, right? Different key. I don't know if this has happened to you, it happened to me, and I know other people it also happened to. When you're starting out learning about jazz, you go to a very good teacher who can play jazz, and you try to play, you want to learn Stella by Starlight or what have you. And I had a teacher like that. I wanted to play all those standards, and he asked me, could you play, let's say, Amazing Grace. Let's play it in A. First off, could you play the melody? You should be able to play the melody by ear, just like that. If you can't do that, it's gonna sound harsh, but it's like, what are you trying to learn how to play Stella by Starlight? You're taking things in the wrong order. You should have to be ability to play a simple hymn, or it's not simple. I don't mean that it's bad. Amazing Grace is amazing, but then play chords under it. That should be easy, right? And I didn't do anything fancy there. I throw in some, chord substitutions, but you could do a lot more than that. But I wasn't even doing any fancy stuff like that. The point is that if you can't do that, what I just did, play a simple 3-chord tune by ear, with chords and bass notes and the melody on top, what are you doing trying to learn how to play Countdown by John Coltrane, right? Instead of thinking, well, these chord cadences sound kind of lame to the jazz ear, you should master this stuff and be able to improvise with these cadences. That's going to give you like a solid foundation of how to play chords and melody and bass notes simultaneously and improvise with it. Then you go back to try to play like Joe Pass, if you know what I mean. So he gets a lot deeper into this stuff. There's a whole bunch more. There's a lot of pages. And again, this is just one lesson out of many from this website. But let's look at a minor situation. A cadence in minor is 1, 4, 5, and the 5 is a dominant chord or a major chord, and minor 1. Again, be aware of the top note. Bass from above. Could be like a Latin thing, or from below. gonna go through the same process. So let's go from prefer to play that chord like that. Maybe use chromatic from below. This is gonna be a little weird. Doesn't really work. Works really well, but it's a little bit tricky fingering wise. And I love this. And of course here you can throw in a diminished chord before the next chord. Here's another example. You also need to think about these as, rather than chord shapes, they're voices, right? The soprano, alto, tenor, bass. So I'm not even talking about what the inner voices are doing. That's a way more sophisticated level of playing when you start being aware of each... I've talked about that in previous lessons, but here I'm mostly focusing on the top and the bottom notes. Use chromatic approach from below. It's not going to work here, but here could be diminished. So now I'm going to try to improvise a little bit and maybe change key to, I don't know, F sharp minor. Example. Again, try to improvise using these shapes. Oh, there's the fifth on the bottom there. I didn't notice that. That's what it is. Gorgeous. Again, change keys. Just pick random keys randomly. Some people get obsessed with doing everything in every key, and that could kind of be a little bit too frustrating because that's going to take years. But at some point, it's good to play stuff through all 12 keys. But here, let's do just a few, just to kind of get into the idea of changing keys. So E minor. I love that. Here's another one. It's one of my favorite voicings. D minor with the F on the bottom like that. Again, let's try C minor. So he gets a lot deeper into that in the next few pages, but that was just kind of an introduction to the idea of practicing cadences. So a cadence, again, is something that establishes a key. And the main objective of this exercise was to develop the ability to improvise using chords, melody, and bass motion at the same time. So I hope that gave you some ideas on how you can do that. And go check out Ted Greene's website. And thank you for your time and attention, and I shall see you next time.